Today we are going to be exploring the last part of Tier 2 of the Unsolved Mystery Iceberg. Those of you who haven't seen the previous videos, I would recommend going back and checking them out, but going forward we are going to be exploring everything from unsolved murders to disappearances, to terrifying space and quantum mysteries. The further down the iceberg we go, things just get darker and weirder and creepier. So without further ado, grab a drink. My choice today is just plain water, and join me as we explore the Unsolved Mystery Iceberg. The Poison Pen murders was actually just one suspected murder and one attempted murder. This was in 1976 Ohio, and it all started with an ominous letter. This letter was sent to Mary Gillespie, who was a school bus driver. The letter said that the writer was aware of an affair that she was having. This letter had no return address inside and no signature, and the letters were all capitalized, with the handwriting looking fairly generic. So at the time, there was very little they could do to figure out who wrote it. Then, a week later, she received a similar letter in the same vein. She kept these to herself until soon after her husband, Ron, received one. And this one said that if he didn't stop the affair, his life was in danger. The next letter Ron received said, "Gillespie, you have had 2 weeks and you have done nothing. Make her admit the truth and inform the school board. If not, I will broadcast it on CBS, posters, signs, and billboards until the truth comes out." Mary and Ron apparently had some idea of who was sending the letters, and they had a plan. Paul Fresher, Mary's brother-in-law, said that they planned to scare the guy who was sending these letters by sending some letters of their own. In the letters, apparently they said, "We know who you are and we know what you're doing," sort of thing, and that he had better stop. And so the letters stopped for a year. Then Ron Gillespie, Mary's husband, received a phone call. After this phone call, he told his kids he loved them and said he was going out to confront the letter writer. He took his gun with him and he left the house. He got into his truck, and just a short distance from his house, he lost control of his vehicle, crashed into a tree, and was killed. Strangely, his gun was missing one bullet, which means between him leaving the house and crashing into the tree, he somehow, for some reason, fired a shot at someone or something. The reason for this shot was never determined, and they eventually marked his death as an accident. Around this time, local residents started receiving anonymous letters saying stuff like the sheriff was involved in a cover-up. And it was a while after this that Mary actually admitted to having an affair, but she said that it only started after the letters were being sent. Yep. Absolutely. Then all went quiet for 5 years until several signs were put up along Mary's bus route. She ignored them at first, but after a while decided to stop ignoring them and went to tear one of them down. She found that the sign was attached by a string to a box behind the post, and in this box was a small pistol. Someone had booby-trapped this sign so that when whoever went to tear it down, likely Mary, the sign would trigger the pistol and fire at whoever was in front of it. Luckily, this booby trap actually failed to fire, and after tracing the serial number on the gun, they determined that the gun belonged to Mary's brother-in-law, Paul Fresher. Dun dun dun. The serial number on the gun had also been attempted to be scratched off, but they were able to bring it to a lab and actually read the scratched off serial number. He apparently didn't like Mary too much, and he knew about the affair, but he said he didn't have anything to do with it. Even though he had a fairly solid alibi for the day that the booby trap was found, Paul was tried and convicted of the attempted murder of Mary, and was sentenced to the maximum sentence of 7 to 25 years. And then the letters just stopped for a month, and then more letters were sent than ever before. They were all anonymous, just like before, and Paul was even put into solitary confinement several times, but the letters never stopped. After a few years, the letters eventually did stop, and after serving 10 years, Paul was released. He maintains to this day that he was innocent, and I guess the question comes up of who was writing these letters, even while Paul was in solitary confinement. Also, who placed the booby trap, and was Ron's death really an accident, or something more sinister? Nobody really knows. The Popeye and Betty Boop sex tape is a reference to an apparent sex tape short made in 1938 involving Popeye and Betty Boop. This was apparently shown once and then never again. It was made as a thank you to the animators who had moved from New York to their new offices in Miami. It apparently involved Popeye visiting Betty Boop in Miami, where Betty gives him a very warm welcome. Apparently they're going at it, and then in classic Popeye fashion, he has to down a can of spinach to finish the job. There's no surviving evidence of this tape, but many people, including people who worked at the studios, swore that they saw it. Primordial black holes. So these are hypothetical black holes that formed soon after the Big Bang. This one gets really complicated, but they have been theorized to be the cause of some early galaxy formations and could be the potential culprit behind dark matter, that lovely mysterious thing responsible for 85% of the matter in the universe. This was covered in episode 2, so check it out. As I said, these topics are relatively unexplained and incredibly complex. But if you want to take a little dive into this one, it is super interesting and I definitely wouldn't stop you. The princes in the tower were the two princes and sons of King Edward IV of England in 1483. They were King Edward V and his younger brother Richard of Shrewsbury. Some of these titles are just amazing. They were aged 12 and 9 respectively, and when their father, Edward IV, died unexpectedly, Edward V was set to be king. In preparation for his coronation, their uncle Richard lodged them in the Tower of London. But before the young king could be crowned, both he and his brother were declared illegitimate, and soon after, their uncle became King Richard III. There is no record of what happened to the boys after this, but it is thought that they were likely killed in some way by their uncle, and there were several people who claimed to be one of the two princes. This was years after their disappearance, but these claims were largely dismissed as fakes. In 1674, while working on the Tower of London, workmen found a wooden box underneath a staircase that contained two small human skeletons. These are widely accepted to be the bones of the two princes, but this is not proven, so to this day, the fate of the two princes in the tower remains a mystery. Pseudo-Neros. So this one is kind of odd. In 68 AD, the Emperor Nero of Rome committed suicide. Then, for the next dozen or so years, several imposters popped up. There were apparently also imperial edicts that were written in the dead Nero's name that encouraged his followers to stay strong and promised his imminent return to take revenge on his enemies. There were prophecies before his death that said that he would regain his kingdom in the east, and this may have, after his death, led to the legends of his resurrection. There are also ideas that Nero was the inspiration for the beast in the Book of Revelations, as the beast is mortally wounded and then miraculously heals himself. And the number of the beast, 666, has been identified by some as the numerical value of the letters in Nero's name. Apparently Nero was long thought to be the Antichrist by some, which would make the whole beast thing make a little more sense. That's a pretty strange one, but ancient times were crazy. Quantum immortality is a fun and completely terrifying one that will likely keep you up for many nights. So this theory combines quantum uncertainty, which is showcased in experiments like Schrodinger's cat, which we covered in episode 3, with the many worlds or multiverse theory. Before we get into this one, I have to say don't try this at home, and if you are feeling down, please do always try and talk to someone. And I will try to summarize here, but it basically says that our consciousness always exists in a universe in which we're alive. So it says that no being can ever witness their own death, as the moment one is set to die, they are instantly conscious in another universe, and so they never witness their death in the current universe. So the idea is that all of the near-death experiences that people have were maybe actual death experiences in another universe. So you were conscious in this other universe, something dangerous was about to happen, and in that universe it actually did happen. But your consciousness instantly jumped to another universe where things went slightly differently and it actually worked out. So from your perspective, it never actually happened. But from the perspective of anyone else in that universe, it was a tragic event. Of course, this is the kind of crazy theory that you can expect to get when you combine quantum uncertainty with a theory that says there are an infinite amount of universes and an infinite amount of possible different outcomes. Bit of a wild one to think about, but I did warn you. The Queensland Tiger is a creature that is said to live in Queensland, Australia. It is described as a dog-sized feline with stripes and a long tail. It is said to be extremely vicious, and some people think it is the last survivor of the officially extinct Thylacoleo. It is known by the natives as Yari, with the earliest recorded sighting being in 1871. But according to the natives, it goes back a lot further than that. Red Rain in Kerala. This was what was called a blood rain event that occurred in 1957 and 2001 in Kerala, India. As you can see, the rain collected was very blood-like, but thankfully it wasn't actually blood, or so they say. No, but for real though, it wasn't blood. It was initially thought that the rain was colored by radioactive fallout, but they later found out that this likely wasn't the cause of the color. The official theory said that the rain had been colored by airborne spores of green algae, which honestly sounds less believable than it actually being blood. The rain wasn't found to be particularly dangerous, and there are still quite a few theories as to what actually caused it. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre. This was the brutal murder of 7 members of Chicago's Irish North Side gang on Valentine's Day 1929. I can't show you any of the images from this one, as they're just incredibly brutal, but feel free to look them up yourself. The 7 men were gathered in a garage in Lincoln Park on the morning of February the 14th. They were all lined up against a wall, and they were all shot dead. The shooters were 4 unknown assailants, 2 of whom were actually dressed as police officers, and they were never caught or identified. This event likely stemmed from the rivalry between the Irish gang in the north, which was led by George Bugs Moran, and their Italian rivals led by Al Capone. Al Capone was largely thought to be responsible for these killings, but he was never convicted of them. The gang members that died were lured to the garage with the lie of purchasing several shipments of illegal whiskey. Al Capone likely planned on killing Bugs Moran there, but only his subordinates showed up for the deal. This is a really brutal one, but it is gang life, I suppose. Seth Rich. This was the murder of Seth Rich in 2016, Washington, D.C. He was shot twice in the back and died an hour later. There were a few theories about this one of which stemmed from the fact that Seth was an employee of the DNC, or Democratic National Committee. For those who don't know, this is the committee or company behind the Democratic Party. So there were people saying that the Republicans killed him in this crazy plot. There were others saying that the Democrats killed him because maybe he had information about the party that he was going to leak. But from what I can tell, these theories are all just likely nonsense, and Seth was likely just killed in a robbery gone wrong. But if it was a targeted killing, maybe that's what they'd make it look like, but who knows. Stephen Smith. This was the murder of 19-year-old Stephen Smith in 2015. In the middle of a road in Hampton County, South Carolina, Stephen was found dead at 3 a.m. and it's still undetermined whether he was shot or was the victim of a hit and run. The case largely went cold on this one for a while, but after the murders of Maggie and Paul Murdoch in 2021, there were some rumors that their son might have been in a secret relationship with Stephen Smith in 2015. This reopened the case, but not much is known to the public about how legitimate this claim actually was, or what other evidence they have regarding Stephen Smith's death. The stone chambers of New England. So New England is somewhat known for its old stone walls and stone structures. Just to name a few, there is the America's Stonehenge in New Hampshire, Calendar 2 in Vermont, Gungiwump in Connecticut, Queen's Fort in Rhode Island, and the Upton Chamber in Massachusetts. There are roughly 700 stone chambers spread out all across New England, and they aren't really found anywhere else in North America. These are incredibly well built if you look into the details of them, and they often contain features like ventilation holes for smoke and shelves and benches built directly into the stone. No one fully knows who built them, and although European settlers kind of make sense, many of the early text from the settlers describes finding these structures when they arrived, so it may have been the Native Americans, but there's little evidence for that either, as typically they don't tend to build structures like this. One other theory is that they were built by traveling Celts way back in the Bronze Age, as the Celtic Europeans are well known for their stone structures. But this one is still a mystery. Tara Calico was a 19-year-old American woman who went missing near her home in New Mexico 1988. She was out on her daily bike ride at 9:30 a.m. when she failed to return home. Her mum went out to look for her, but after finding nothing, she called the police. Her and her bike were never found, and sadly no one witnessed the abduction. Almost a year later, a Polaroid was found in the parking lot of a convenience store. I don't think I can show the photograph on YouTube, but if you want to see it, just search for it. I'm sure it'll pop up. The photo basically shows a woman and a boy bound and gagged with black tape in the back of a van. The woman, while not obviously Tara, could potentially be her, as they do bear a fair bit of resemblance. The woman and the boy in the Polaroid were never identified, but Tara's mother strongly believes this to be her. She was never found and was declared dead by homicide in 1998. But just last month, the sheriff's office announced a breakthrough in the case, and they were submitting a review to move forward with potential charges. But the identity of the suspect involved is remaining anonymous until the charges go through. There are a lot of these being solved just as I make a video, which is a good thing. The Tonome is a Japanese spirit or yokai that appears and often scares or attacks people. Its eyes are not on its face, but rather on the palms of its hands. They first appeared in Gazu Hayaki Yagyo by Toriyama Sekin in 1776, but they have been scaring children and me ever since. The most mysterious song on the internet. This was a song likely recorded in 1984, but who the artist is completely unknown. It was recorded from a radio program in Germany by Darius S. All the other songs on the tape that he recorded that day have been identified, except for this one. Over 20 years later, his sister, for whatever reason, was hell-bent on finding the artist of this song. So she posted a digitalized version online, and dozens of users got to work trying to find the song's author. In the process of this, they actually found many other hidden songs, but they never actually found out who made this one. I'll include a link to the song in the description if you want to check it out. Maybe you can solve the puzzle of the most mysterious song on the internet. The Westfield Watcher. This is a creepy one. In June 2014, Derek and Maria Broadus bought a family home in Westfield, New Jersey. This was an expensive home in a pretty rich, safe neighborhood, and they moved in with their 3 children. 3 days after buying the house, a strange letter appeared in the mailbox. The letter read, 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies behind the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out. It creepily went on to mention details about the family's minivan, their renovation plans, and even their children. It was signatured at the bottom, The Watcher. So Derek, of course, called the police, and after contacting the previous owners of the house, they too said they had received a similar letter just days before they moved out. But since they were moving out anyway, they just disregarded and threw away the letter. So the Broadus family went on high alert for a few weeks, but eventually another letter came through, this time addressing the Broadus family by name. It even listed changes that they had made to the house, and listed their children by their nicknames and their birth dates. Super creepy. It went on to ask about one child, who often painted on the porch. Is she the artist in the family? The letter asked. All of the windows and doors in 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. Who am I? I am the Watcher, and have been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you as it was their time to move on, and they kindly sold it when I asked them to. They eventually got the FBI involved, but there was very little evidence to actually go anywhere. The Broadus family actually considered tearing the house down and just building a new one, but this prompted a rather threatening letter from the Watcher. Maybe a car accident, maybe a fire, maybe something as simple as a mild illness that never seems to go away, but makes you feel sick day after day after day after day after day. Maybe the mysterious death of a pet. Loved ones suddenly die. Planes and cars and bicycles crash. Bones break. You wonder who the Watcher is? Turn around, idiots. So eventually in 2019, they sold the house at a $500,000 loss. This story was apparently so interesting that Netflix won the rights to make a series out of it after a bidding war between 6 other studios. The Watcher was never identified, and to this day, this mysterious figure remains a mystery. The tomb of Ghengis Khan has been the subject of speculation for many, many years. He was one of the greatest, most brutal, violent leaders in all of history. In his lifetime in the 13th century, his Mongol Empire invaded and ruled most of Asia and a good chunk of Europe. He died in 1227, but he asked to be buried without markings or signs. So where his body is actually buried, we have no idea. The Uncanny Valley origins. This is the relationship between how much an object resembles a human being and our emotional response to that object. For example, fully natural humans are quite normal to us. And obviously inhuman things like fluffy toys, dogs, and rocks are quite normal to us as well. But the weird part is when we get things that act or look almost human, like AI robots or creepy dolls, that things start to seem creepy and terrifying. This hypothesis was first introduced by robotics professor Masahiro Mori. This was in 1970 and it has been picking up support ever since. I think it's quite a sound theory, as this really creeps me out. The Vela Incident was a double flash of light detected by an American Vela satellite system in 1979. This was in the Indian Ocean, and the cause of this double flash is officially unknown. But we all know what officially unknown means. It is thought by some to be an undeclared nuclear test carried out by South Africa and Israel, as the previous 41 double flashes detected by the Vela satellite were all caused by nuclear tests. The officials say they don't know what caused it. Maybe it was a nuclear test and maybe it was a small piece of rock hitting into the satellite, which, yeah, that totally sounds credible. But the details of this case are still classified by the United States government. Why Cracker Barrel fired Brad's wife? This one's kind of hilarious. After Bradley Reed's wife was fired by Cracker Barrel, which is a food place, I guess, Bradley posted on the Cracker Barrel's Facebook page asking why they had fired her. This led to a internet meme of some sort, and soon there were hundreds of people online asking why they had fired her. There were dozens of posts on all of their pages saying stuff like "We demand answers for Brad and his wife" and hashtag "Justice for Brad's wife." Soon there was a petition started that amassed over 17,000 signatures, and various other restaurants chimed in saying they would hire Brad's wife. Eventually, after realizing he had started something that he kind of wish he hadn't, Brad asked everyone to stop harassing the restaurant, and it just kind of died out from there. No one to this day knows why Cracker Barrel fired Brad's wife, but this was still a fun one. Why the Tyrannosaurus Rex had tiny arms. This sounds like the first line to a joke. So the T-Rex, that was one of the most fearsome dinosaurs to ever live, had, strangely, hilariously, really tiny arms. This was one of the more aggressive and terrifying beasts, but had one of the smallest arm-to-body ratios of any dinosaur in the Mesozoic era. It's not entirely clear why their arms were so small, what they even used them for, or whether given a few more million years of evolution, their arms would have disappeared entirely, as they did with snakes. But I suppose when you've got a jaw like this, you don't really need arms. The Willpower Paradox is a really interesting one. If you've ever tried to do something you really want to do, but for some reason you just can't will yourself to do it. Maybe it's going gym, maybe it's studying when you know you should, maybe it's giving up or even taking up a habit. It's kind of a tricky one because it's often said that you can't, for instance, will yourself out of an addiction or will your mental health problems away. Yet, often to cure these ills, it requires the person to be willing. Therapy, for instance, often doesn't work if the person just doesn't want to be there. You kind of have to be willing to trust that certain methods will work without really using will in those methods themselves. You have to set up the space and environment with will, but then kind of trust that the environment will fix your problems without you hard forcing them. It's a very strange dynamic, and it has often confused many people, myself included, who honestly try to do their best with sheer will, but fall short of their will. And it's something we are all getting better at. The Wormhole Theory says that there are theoretical passages through space-time that could lead to shortcuts across the universe. The general idea I will expertly demonstrate on this piece of paper here. So say this is the universe. For these purposes, it is on a 2D plane, and to get from point A to point B requires you to travel this distance to get there. But in theory, if you were able to bend space-time, instead of having to travel this entire distance, you would only have to travel this small distance between the two wormholes, and you would come out on the opposite end of the universe. They were first theorized in 1916, and over the years, Albert Einstein and Nathan Rosen expanded on this idea. These were bridges, possibly between black holes and newly theorized white holes. The black holes would be the entrance, sucking everything in, and the exit would be these white holes, and between them, they would allow travel across the universe. They became known as Einstein-Rosen bridges, or wormholes. This is still purely theoretical, and although the theory of relativity does predict these, we haven't observed one yet. There are also other complications in this, like needing a certain amount of anti-gravity matter in order to keep the wormhole from collapsing in on itself, but that's a whole nother story for a whole nother Star Trek episode. Yeah, Beebus 1. This was an NES game first mentioned in June 1989 in an issue of Video Games and Computer Entertainment. There doesn't actually seem to be any evidence that this game existed, even after being mentioned 3 more times in later issues of the magazine. It is thought that maybe they put the game in there to take up some white space on the page, or they put it in there to catch anyone who is copying their list, as since the game was entirely made up, it would catch anyone who is plagiarizing it. Or maybe it was just a joke by someone at the company. But to this day, the game's existence remains unconfirmed. Yeti. So I've covered the North American version of this one, the Bigfoot, in previous episodes. And the Yeti is very similar in appearances to Bigfoot, but often just a little shorter at around 6 foot. It is a character in ancient legends and folklore of the Himalayan people and all throughout Asia. And funnily enough, Alexander the Great apparently demanded to see a Yeti when he conquered the Indus Valley. This was all the way back in 326 BC, but the locals told him they were unable to present him with one, as the Yeti could not survive at such low altitudes. The name, the Abominable Snowman, came from a 1921 journalist, who mistranslated the local name for the legend. It correctly translates as Man-Bear Snowman, but he translated it as Filthy Snowman, and he thought abominable sounded better than filthy, so he posted the legend as the Abominable Snowman, and thus the name was born. There have been many sightings over the years of the apparent Yeti roaming around various mountain ranges all throughout Asia, but to this day, none have been captured. The zombie EAS Hijacking was a suspicious local area emergency message that went out in 2013 in several stations in Montana and Michigan. They displayed a warning of a zombie apocalypse, and the message seemed pretty legit. I'll leave the full text of the message in a comment below, but apparently it was a hijack, apparently. And the hacker was caught the next day. Or it was a cover-up and everyone involved was silenced, which is totally possible. Baikal Seals are these super cute seals, although let's be real, all seals are super cute, who only live in the waters of Lake Baikal in southern Siberia. These seals are thought to have inhabited the lake for roughly 2 million years, but it's still a mystery as to how they got there. Theories range from them swimming upstream from the Arctic over many years, eventually ending up in the lake, to the lake once being directly connected to the ocean, which formed as a lake after it was disconnected from the Arctic, and after these seals had made their home there. But the mystery of these cute little seals still today remains a mystery. Michaela Bali. This was the sad case of a 16-year-old girl who went missing in Saskatchewan, Canada in 2016. She was last seen at a bus stop, but no clues as to her whereabouts have been found since. Almost her entire day up to her disappearance has been tracked and documented, and theories of her disappearance range from her running away, which didn't seem likely as she left a bunch of her emergency money and medication behind, to her being kidnapped by someone she met online, as she often used a bunch of different apps to connect with new people and make new friends. And although there have been quite a few tips and sightings over the years, none of them panned out, and to this day, Michaela Bali is still missing. And on that sad note, that is all we have time for. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I certainly did, and if you did, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell, so you don't miss the rest of this series. Next episode, we'll be cracking open Tier 3 and going deeper and deeper with each episode. Check out our Discord in the description if you haven't already. And as always guys, thanks for watching.